This is a Note to Future Me on Wednesday, June 13th, 2018. Podcast advertising revenues up in 2017. I don't think that's any surprise to anyone, but it's always good to have the facts. U.S. podcast advertising captured $314 million in revenue in 2017. That's a rise of 86% year over year. That's according to the latest IAB PwC podcast advertising revenue study for the full year of 2017, released by the Interactive Advertising Bureau. Now, the latest podcast advertising revenue study is based on self-reporting by leading podcast companies and a quantitative mailing survey with leading industry players, including podcast publishers and ad networks. So the study's pretty accurate. Usually self-reporting does a very good job of getting a good gauge of what's going on in the industry. The research predicts podcast revenue will surge to $659 million by 2020, $500 million, and that's a triple-digit 100% hike from the 2017 number. Host-read ads were cited as the preferred ad type, representing more than 2/3 of ads in 2017. If you're a heavy podcast listener, you're pretty much knew that was going to be the case. Direct response ads transacted on a cost per thousand basis made up the majority of campaigns, followed by brand awareness ads, 29%. In addition, ads integrated or edited into programming accounted for over half, 58%, of the podcast ad inventory in 2017. Of the 14 podcast content genres measured, the top 4 generated more than half of the advertising revenue in 2017. Let's go over those. The top one is arts and entertainment at 17%, technology at 15%, news, politics, current events at 13%, and business at 11%. So those percentages are really tight. It does surprise me in regards to the more news comes to the news, politics, current events, and the business podcast. But actually, the arts and entertainment and technology still are kind of king by 2 to 3 percentage points. Cutting the figures by advertiser category revealed that financial services spent most on podcasting with an 18% share. So, financial services are possibly a category you should target if your podcast is in the right genre. 2 out of 10 advertisers are financial services. This was followed by direct-to-consumer retailers at 16% and arts and entertainment brands at 13%. A couple of interesting notes, diving a little bit deeper. According to Ford Motor Company, a particularly intriguing podcast data point is that 76% of listening happens in a car. And when it partnered with Gimlet Media's startup podcast, the auto brand found that its storytelling approach helped lift brand metrics and boost purchase intent. And I'm going to have a link to that report from WARC, W-A-R-C. The report is called Ford Has a Newer Idea of Podcasting. The April edition of WARC's Global Ad Trends report, which focuses on the radio and digital audio industry, found that podcast advertising outperformed pre-roll video for driving purchase intent in over half of the cases that they studied, 57%. Let's go focus on that again. This report found that podcast advertising outperformed pre-roll video for driving purchase intent 57% of the time. Keep that in mind when you start to go up against those that are really into the video and using video for advertising. You've got a case study there, and I'll put a link in the podcast show notes to that study showing that podcast does better for purchase intent than pre-roll video. Now, to put the ad spend in perspective with other U.S. ad spending, I thought I'd include this as well too. Yeah, podcasts are just starting to grow, but we're going up against some areas that have been around for 50, 60, 70 years, well over 100 years, a couple hundred years actually. But, internet garners the biggest U.S. ad spend at $69.2 billion. That's with a B. Television comes in at second at 68.5. Radio, it's 17.6. Newspapers, 16.6. Magazines, 15.4. Outdoor, 9.7. Cinema at 0.9. And then podcasts do come in at 0.3. But, again, podcasts coming in to some, very old avenues of ad spend, but it's growing exponentially and doing really well. Comparatively, in the short term, the podcasts have actually been able to garner some U.S. ad spend. And this source in regards to the U.S. ad spend was based from Zenith. Overall, strong numbers speak to advertisers increasing recognition that podcasts provide a powerful platform to reach and engage audiences. It's showing that advertisers are just now starting to tap into the medium's highly engaged audience. Perfect time to start talking. If you're looking at sponsoring a podcast as a business owner, do it. The engagement rate, the brand awareness piece of podcasts, the lean in of engaged podcast listeners, it's there. And if you're hosting a podcast looking to accept advertising and your focus this year is to get some sponsorship, it's only growing. Get out there and start pitching. It will happen. Be sure to go to my Circle270media.com website. Sign up for my free daily Open the Mic newsletter. I cover social media tips, production tips, podcast news, as well as on Fridays, giving you a heads up on some podcasts to binge listen over the weekend. Thanks for taking notes with me.